Hello, my name is Brooklyn Abney, and this is a presentation over psychologist and education reformer Charles H. Judd, also the creator of the transfer of learning theory of generalization. In Judd's early life, he was born February 20th, 1873 in Bareilly, India. The reason he was in India is because his parents were Methodist missionaries. His parents were Charles Wesley Judd and Sarah Herbert Judd. Eventually, his parents decided to return to the United States in 1879 when Charles was 6 years old. They lived in Binghamton, New York. However, due to unfortunate circumstances, both of his parents got sick, not at the exact same time, but within a few years, and he was left orphaned at age 11 and cared for by his eldest sister. He did have one other sister, but she was younger. As far as Judd's education went, he did receive a high school diploma in 1880 at one of the Binghamton schools in New York. He continued his education to Wesleyan University in Connecticut, where he received an A.B. degree in 1894. He then received his doctorate degree at the University of Leipzig in Germany, and he studied psychology there. So that was kind of where he really started discovering his love for psychology and educational psychology tied in together. In Judd's life, he was married twice. His first marriage was to Ella Lecomte Judd in 1898. They did have one daughter named Dorothy Judd, but unfortunately Ella passed away in 1935. Due to this, Judd remarried, and his second marriage was to Mary Deal Judd in 1937, and she was with him up until his death, and she survived him. Judd's first job was actually at his alma mater. He was an assistant professor at Wesleyan University. He actually taught under his mentor, Andrew Campbell Armstrong, which I'll get to in a little bit. He taught at this school. He taught undergraduate courses in psychology from 1896 to 1898. When he got an offer from New York University, he took it in 1898. Here he taught courses in pedagogy, and the interesting thing about his time at New York, he was said he was very ill prepared to teach his students about education, and one of his students came up to him and asked, "How do I use this information to teach children?" That totally made him rethink his understanding of education, and he wanted to learn more about schools and how they work so that he could better and more effectively teach his own students. Sadly, at the New York University, he was asked to resign after 2 years because of problems with his beliefs and students' beliefs that he agreed with that the administration really didn't. So after he left from New York University, he went to the University of Cincinnati in Ohio, which only lasted a year. Here he was a professor of psychology and pedagogy, and he obtained a lot of experience here. After working at the University of Cincinnati, Judd received an invitation to work at Yale University. Even though the pay was lower, he was so ecstatic about the job offer because it would just add to his repertoire for education. This occurred in 1901, where he taught courses in psychology, and he established Yale Psychology Laboratory. He made it one of the most premier research facilities in the education field. He worked in education and published his first book here and worked with school systems to develop courses for teachers. His time at Yale mainly focused on the nature of learning, where he discussed higher and lower mental processes, the influence of movement, and transfer of training. Then in 1909, he was actually appointed the director of the School of Education at the University of Chicago. Here, he spent most of his career. He retired in 1938, which I'll talk about later, but he succeeded in securing the University of Chicago School of Education as one of the most prominent schools for teachers in the entire country. The list of credits to his name are endless during this time, and he had a significant influence on the field of educational psychology and the scientific study of education while he worked here. He also authored and co-authored the books The Nature of Reading and Silent Reading here, and that was one of his most famous works, was his work in reading. Though there are so many reasons that Judd is famous, especially in the field of education, his transfer of learning theory of generalization development occurred in his book Education as Cultivation of Power Mental Processes. His theory on this, it means that experiences obtained in one situation are applicable to other situations. It puts emphasis upon the value to understand, organize, and generalize specific experiences. So he was a huge developer in that sense. And actually, Thorndike, he didn't agree with Thorndike, and they kind of butted heads on that. So that was kind of interesting for me to learn. At the University of Chicago, he became the leading center, or he made it become the leading center of scientific study of education. He is well known for his belief in the importance of social psychology and the power of scientific study in education. He really pushed that, and I think that's one reason today we really focus on educational psychology is because his work in educational psychology back in the day. And he had numerous contributions to the field of reading, and I'm going to talk about that a little later because that is probably one of the biggest things he's known for is his thoughts on silent and oral reading. One of the reasons that Judd became so famous was his works on education. He spent a lot of time writing, and throughout his writings, he really emphasized the importance of social psychology and the study of education. And that was really emphasized in his first book, Genetic Psychology for Teachers. The other books listed here were super significant. Some people even use them today. He just had a lot of good ideas about education and what it should look like. So, one of his most famous books, and the one he's mainly remembered for, is the books he co-authored on the nature of reading and silent reading, and I'm going to get to that in a little bit. In Judd's life, he has quite a list of influencers. First off, in his elementary and high school years, he was influenced by a science teacher, R.W. Griffiths, and his high school principal, Elliot R. Payson, and it said that both pushed him to achieve his fullest potential in academics. He was also very influenced by his Methodist minister, Reverend George Murray Colville, who actually lived across the street from Judd. He took him under his wing, and Judd was actually not super motivated at this time. So Reverend kind of used reverse psychology and said that the teachers didn't think that he was capable of high intellectual work. So he told them to prove them wrong, and that's exactly what he did. He and Judd and the Reverend got so close that he actually paid for his doctorate degree, which was so generous, and Judd was forever grateful for it. For his university influences, which had the most influence on his actual thought process towards education, were Andrew Campbell Armstrong and William Wundt. Andrew Campbell Armstrong was at the University of Wesleyan, and he was also Thorndike's professor. He was a caring mentor who provided Judd with individual attention and instilled core values of academic life. He exposed him to the profession by taking him to the American Psychology Association meetings. Here, Judd learned about a galaxy of psychologists and was able to view a psychology lab. This had a profound influence on his work in the lab at Yale and his presidency later on for the APA in 1909. He learned a lot from Armstrong about the importance of systematic, coherent thought and the need to take into account the thoughts of leaders in any project in any field. Judd acknowledged Armstrong as providing him with models of lectures and discussions better than anyone else he studied. He said that this helped him the most in his teaching career. Wundt, he allowed Judd to translate his texts. They were so strong. He had never let anyone else translate his text into English, but he let Judd. He challenged Judd to support his claims with facts and have plenty of facts to pull from. He was all about having facts and knowing your stuff, knowing your content, and that was one thing that Judd learned from him. He also had very similar works to Judd, so that just showed how much Judd really envied him. In Judd's autobiography, you can see the relationship between them, and he discusses their relationship. Through both of these mentors, Judd really used their influences to advance his own academic career, and they really had a profound impact on him in his view of education. In Judd's late life and death, he retired from the University of Chicago in 1938, but he loved what he did so much that after retirement he worked in California school systems and still published until his death. He died July 18, 1946 in Santa Barbara, California. The tributes to Judd following his death were numerous, but two of the most significant were two buildings dedicated to him, which was the Education Building at the University of Chicago and an elementary school in Chicago. And here in the bottom corner, you can see the Charles Hubbard Judd Hall in Chicago. That's a picture of it today. In the field of education today, Judd's influence still holds true. He has numerous contributions to the field of reading. The process of learning to read is socially influenced rather than an isolated event, he discovered. Children should learn to read early. He really pushed this, that children should be learning as soon as they start school. It should not wait. It's kind of like he compared it to someone learning a foreign language when they're older. It's a lot harder. Decoding and encoding, he was a big supporter of that. He really pushed the connection between oral language and learning to read. Scientific study of education in relation to reading was also a big thing for him. So these are things that everyone uses today in reading, like teachers study him, psychologists study him. He was super important. On with his influence in education with reading specifically, he believed in multiple forms of reading assessment. He didn't believe it was fair to just test kids in one area and say, oh, there you go, that's how smart you are. That just doesn't make sense. It doesn't work. You need experimental methods. Eye movement during oral and silent reading. He believed that was super important, and we still use that today. Silent reading importance, again, how important it is for kids to silent read. Modern understanding of how fluent reading is achieved. So fluency, everything we get from fluency, Judd was a founder of that. Reading occurs through social interaction, not memorization. So he did not agree with rote memorization. He was more about thinking and doing and talking, and that was really good. And then the importance of reading strategies in middle and high school. A lot of people thought once you got in elementary, you got it. Nope, he did not believe that. He believed that middle and high school also need to teach reading because kids do not need to get left behind. And he also was a big supporter of the scientific study of education. Here are the sources I used for this presentation. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it.